I hate him so much!
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Hayley.
I'm Lanina.
I'm KD.
And before we get started, I just want to remind our listeners that you could find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. I am personally on Discord as DM Scorpio number 0660, and I've created a channel for Alien Familiar Media. We have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. And so if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help would be greatly appreciated. So, our topic for today is we're going to be talking about the final battle, designing climactic cinematic fights. We've had, a couple of us have had, have a very fresh perspective on this because we've had campaign ending sessions, but we're not just talking about campaign ends. We're talking about just anytime you got a bad guy or a force that has been built up, and this is the point where the player characters are going to confront them quite possibly for the last time. Lanina asked me for a little bit of advice before she did her most recent one, and if I'd been thinking about it, I would have pulled up that email. Okay. I don't remember exactly what I had in the email, but she's going to be bringing it up. But I do remember that one of the first things I said was to make sure that you are ready for the very distinct possibility that the player character are just going to tear through your big bad and defeat them in no time, making a very anticlimactic final encounter.
Very disappointing and anticlimactic, even if it wasn't supposed to happen like that. Mm-hmm. It goes pretty in depth. I think one of the first things that you also mentioned was like health for the big bad, because you don't want it to be too much. If it's too much, then everybody dies, and then the players are unhappy, and you don't really want that.
These types of fights usually happen a ways into the campaign, so you've had a little bit of time to kind of gain a feel for how the combat system works, what kind of the strengths and weaknesses of your players might be. I mean, but even with all of that, I've been game mastering for over 20 years now, and I still get blindsided by just how effective player characters can be when they put down their phones, they start fucking paying attention, and they are set on the course of destroying whatever obstacle is put in front of them.
I think this was one of my biggest issues because it was also my first campaign I'd ever DM'd, and it was 3.5, and I was like, I want it to be more fun. I'll push them up to level 10, which is about 4 levels higher than what they were, right? Give or take?
Yeah, we went up to level 10. And we were like level 6. So 4 levels then. It
blindsided me with how much they were able to obtain, because very rarely I find that do we ever get to that high of a level in a normal campaign. And I had never been a level 10, but I wanted everybody to have fun. It was my first campaign, and I think that was my first mistake there.
Well, I remember talking to Jordan after that, and he was like, because part of the issue was for the audience, I was one-shotting bosses, because all of us, not just me, were misreading the Call Lightning ability in 3.5 that druids can use, along with other spellcasters. And it's supposed to be that a lightning bolt that does 3d10 damage strikes every turn, for a maximum of 12 bolts. Instead, we kind of missed the once per turn thing and just figured you could just nuke people with just smite them, basically. Mm-hmm. Which sounds fucking cool, but in reality it's very hard to deal with. And so I remember talking to Jordan about that, and he was like, yeah, I wouldn't even worry about it. Like, I can count on one hand the number of times I ever got to, like, level 10 in a game. And I think that's pretty uniform. I think a lot of games don't make it that far.
I have played a character who was level 10 or higher exactly twice in 20 years.
Oh,
so,
wow.
And one of those times was a character who started at level 13.
Well, alrighty.
I only had one character that went from level 1 to, I think the campaign ended when he was level 11.
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
That's a long time coming.
It is a long time. I mean, even in 3rd edition, when we were playing, it takes a long time to get up there. I can't even imagine playing in 2nd edition or before, when experience was a lot different and you needed a lot more of it to reach your levels, especially if you were a wizard.
Yeah, I think that my first piece of advice is that if you're going to hyper level, do it very early on in the game and not at the end when you don't expect anything. I really think that was one of my biggest problems, but I know I struggled with the health a bit as well. I was just, because the way you suggested it to me was to take the average level of the party, multiply it by 12, or add all of the max damage together by each player, and whichever one was higher picked that. And so, let's think. Average level.
It's a lot of math.
If it was 10, that would be like roughly 120, right?
So I actually came up with that method because I hated doing the math of building up a character from basically level 1 to whatever level was needed for the encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with that very quick and dirty system because in the Dungeon Master's Guide and through 3rd edition there was charts where you could look up like how many hit points a player character of a certain level of a certain class would be, and those never worked right.
Sure.
They were always underpowered. They needed to be probably 5 levels higher than what the book suggested in order for them to even approach a threat to the player characters. So that's why I came up with that system that I shared. I'll find that email and I'll clean it up a little bit, and I'll actually post it in the show notes for this episode.
If you need, I can re-forward it to you. What I ended up doing was roughly taking the 120 that it would have been and making it, because they were just doing a lot of damage, more than I anticipated, and I made it so the secret trick that would have ended the fight a lot sooner, if they had done that first, it would have doubled the damage, because I halved it, so all of the damage they were doing was done by half until they put down the shield, so to speak, and that helped slow things down and allowed progress to be made, and for all of the characters to take their turns, and for the boss to not just get wiped out.
That's one of the biggest problems that I run into is, like, if you've got a single big bad, the players they're going to focus all of their energy on that. It doesn't matter how many minions they have around them. The player characters will focus like a laser on that big bad and push everything that they have down on them as quickly as possible in order to destroy them. Most of the time, they'll completely ignore any other targets that are on the field at the time. So a couple of things that I do to kind of balance that out is, if at all possible, I make sure that there's not just one target that has to be eliminated for the fight to be ended. And if it's a final fight, like a big climactic fight, I try to whittle them down before they even get there. Try to push them and really tempt them to use their more powerful magics, especially magic. Because if the player characters know that they're going to be fighting the big bad at the end of whatever adventure they're going on, they're going to hold back their biggest stuff. So
it's video game logic.
Exactly. The player characters will get there, and to use Final Fantasy parlance, they'll have 99 mega elixirs that
like
they
Phoenix
can just
Downs and stuff.
Phoenix Downs and everything that they need to make sure that they're standing at full strength at the beginning of the fight, and that they have their most awesome, powerful magics and weapons to bring down the wrath of God on whoever they're fighting. Because more often than not, that's exactly what they're doing. It's usually the situation where you got to defeat them to save the world.
Well, I've always thought it's interesting with the video game logic, because there is an assumption that is inherent, and it's not unfounded, that all the genres of fantasy and science fiction and everything that you play role-playing games in kind of have a pretty standard trope that is, founded in the mythos of both of those things, of you defeat the big bad, and anyone around them stops fighting. Star Wars, which I know we've talked about extensively, is more fantasy than sci-fi. Death Star blows up, at the end of Return of the Jedi, like, sure, there's still Imperial forces out there, but, like, they're stopping, they're not doing anything. In an MMO, if you're playing, you have to deal with the ads, but, like, once you beat the boss, the fight ends. I think it'd be very interesting to have a final boss fight where people go in with that expectation and, like, totally, like, just one-shot the boss and ignore the ads around them. And then maybe, like, accidentally get kind of fucked up by the rest of them that are still just like, we're still here, and, like, kind of...
You killed our boss.
Yeah, you killed our boss. And if they're being mind-controlled, sure, great, that's an easy out there to be like, oh, they're free now.
Yeah.
But, if they're, like, if it's, like, a mercenary commander or something, and... he had really got, like, it's like a Metal Gear Solid thing where he really had the respect of his men. Like, they're not going to just be like, oh, our boss is dead, I guess we'll give up. They might just be like, hey, fuck you guys. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, we burn all the items and all the heavy hidden stuff on the boss. I guess we're going to just have to, like, scrap our way out of this. And I think that could be also just as entertaining as a final fight. Mm-hmm. As, a big cinematic, like, duel.
Yeah.
In the first game that I ran, the big boss, they were, like, underneath the secret lake, and they beat them, and it was awesome and wonderful, except for the fact that they forgot that the way they got to the lake was they set something on fire, and there were 30 frenzying vampires they had to get through up top after they had beaten the boss and wasted all of their, like, blood points on it. So I thought that was very interesting how they had to try and...
Did they fight their way out?
Half of them did. The other half decided to climb the chandelier and sneak their way out.
Interesting. Did those that fight the way out survive or no?
They did, but barely.
Interesting.
They did have to take one of the frenzied vampires and diablerize them to get out. Drink some blood. Oh. So basically, diablerization is instead of a human drinking them and killing them, you drink and kill a vampire. Eat the baby, take its powers.
Terrifying.
You completely consume the vampire's soul while you're feeding off of them. So they are utterly destroyed and you take their power into yourself.
Yeah.
Now I will say this, you have to be careful because at the same time that can also come off as anticlimactic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, we had this big fight and then, even if it's a tough fight against the remaining, like, ads or whatever, they're still just kind of mooks. And, like, I've definitely been in a situation where because I guess I'm a hypocrite, I've been in that exact same situation where we wasted the big boss. The GM was like, yeah, but he's still got all these guys around. And, like, I'm at, like, half health and, like, reloading my gun, and I'm just like, God fucking damn it, like, these guys aren't even worth my time. Like, ow, he's hitting me pretty hard, but, like, he's still a mook. Like, fuck this. Now I'm not having fun anymore. I think it's a read the room sort of deal. Because I've definitely been on the inverse of that, too.
I guess what I was going to say is make them care about these mooks. Don't be just a bunch of faceless things. Make it like an NPC that they ran in. Make someone that they care be caught in the fray of it. The vampire game that you played in, all of the Camarilla head that was meeting before you went to go fight the big bad, there were like 7 people in there that you knew were innocent bystanders, and they were stuck in there, so you had the option to go rescue them. And there was also that one guy that you fucking hated that revealed that he wasn't dead. He was alive the whole time. And you guys had the, like he was trying to egg you on to fight him, so you want to get to the big bad. And just, make them care about the faceless mooks, I guess. Like, give them a reason to make it a point. Like, they're either going to hurt someone that you care about, or they're really just a big dick.
Something else, like, if you're going to have other things that you have to fight after the big bad has been killed. I was in a Vampire Dark Ages game, and we had defeated the final, basically, boss of the campaign. We had made this pilgrimage to Jerusalem and had to fight them there. And as we were coming out of this tomb just outside of Jerusalem, we were riding high. We were all broken and battered, and nobody had more than 2 points of vitae on them. Everybody was like walking around with very severe injuries. And we get outside of this tomb after we had finally finished off the final boss, and on one side there was Saladin's army, and on the other side there was fortified Jerusalem standing against him. And we were literally caught in the crosshairs of a situation where, one, we didn't know we were going to be coming out into it, and 2, we were absolutely not prepared, and my character got brained by the first person that came across them as we were fleeing across the desert in order to escape from this victorious campaign. I just got dead.
Really? So it's like some fucker with a mace was just like, and like fucking not brained you, and that was it? Like you were done?
Basically.
That sucks.
See, I was gonna say, like, if they had a satisfying ending enough with the boss, and there's an unrelated situation that's not attached to them, I don't know, I feel like a DM would have the insight, be like, this isn't important, you guys are victorious, rather in a sense of, like, when it's like Brainless Fighters, like a mercenary leader, there are all these other men that you would have to fight, rather than an outside source.
It's just, like, it's like a secret big bad. It's like there's a boss behind your boss, and I think that's the DM's problem, or their main point is, like, if you're going to have a secret boss, you have to let the players come out somewhat alive.
If you're going to have a secret boss, you need to give them some hints that they then pick up on. It's very similar to what you were saying a little bit ago about, like, having some sort of secret about the big bad that you've got to defeat. Kind of like a mini puzzle in the final fight, or leading up to the fight, where you got to learn something about how to defeat them,
or even specific dialogue. You know, like when you're fighting, like in Persona, you're fighting the boss, and then he's like, "Oh, it's not over yet," or he's just like, "Oh, it's gonna get worse from here on," and then all of a sudden there's a bigger boss, and you're like, "I anticipated this, yet I'm still surprised."
Yeah, the Persona method of boss battles is very interesting, because you have, like, this is the battle, and it's really hard, and they're like, this isn't my true form! And then it gets really scary.
That's a JRPG trope in general. It's like, this isn't... There's a meme about it, too, which is like, this isn't even my final form.
Yeah. I first encountered it in Final Fantasy, like, 7 or 8.
Like Sephiroth has, I think.
Yeah,
2 or 3 forms.
Yeah.
Does his sword just get bigger?
No, he actually turns... That One-Winged Angel, the big song there, is a reference to the final form, because he, like, fucking has one wing, and he's like a god, and floats down this fucking
crazy
cloud.
I guess, though, with games like that, you anticipate it, but in, like, RPGs, there's gotta be a way to, like, give that to your players.
Sure. In that particular scenario, though, like, how the hell are you gonna fight an army? Like, that's not a final boss, you know? Like, that would be a final boss for, you know, if you also had an army, right? But even then, unless it's, like, a like, pulled out, scaled, like, tactical tabletop, you know, like, you're still probably gonna be fighting a leader in the army or something, right? You're not going to be fighting the whole army by yourself. That to me, just like, I think, to be honest, comes off as like poor DMing.
Yeah.
No offense to whoever you know that ran that game, but
now that we're talking about it, I remember what happened a little bit more clearly. It wasn't just some random person. It was a character who had been tied to it was an enemy character who had been tied to my character. Somehow, I don't remember. It's been like 10 years since this chronicle happened.
Sure.
But it was relevant to my character who killed me, but it was still a situation of, oh shit, they're here. I didn't expect them to be
here
1,000 miles away from the last place that I saw them. And
conveniently,
they're standing there at full strength with all of they've obviously just fed, and I'm basically a withered husk of a vampire, just barely able to stagger forward, and they just came up and just...
Were you the only one that died, out of curiosity?
No, I was not the only player character who died in that situation.
Was it a TPK?
It was not a TPK, because one character managed to escape.
Yikes! So one dude, like...
Escape, not, like, one...
Sure, he just literally got out with his life, or unlife. Interesting. Wow.
Obfuscation is a hell of a discipline.
Yeah.
Now, I guess, I'm assuming you didn't really feel like that was a victory, or like you've just completed a game, you know? You probably felt like it was a fumble on the 1 yard line.
Yes.
We almost did it, and then like, no, you know what that is? That's literally like you're a running back, right? And you've stiff-armed a couple, like, defensive, backs, and you're running. It's almost a touchdown. You're so close. There's no one else by the field on you. There's no other, like, fucking
and then there's
people
the
on the enemy
marching
team.
band.
Yeah, and then someone for the marching band pulls out a pistol and just brains you. And you're like, as it, like, the bullet collides with your skull, you're like, fuck! I didn't think the marching band would have a gun, and then it turned out that, like, it was this dude who, you, like, took his girlfriend back in high school, but he's remembered, and he sees you and just, that's it, you're done. But hey, it's important to you, because, you know, you haven't seen this guy in years. You're playing professional football. And this dude's just there. You haven't seen him since high school. But hey, he was important to you.
Yes.
He was important to your storyline.
When your GM uses your backstory to screw you over.
That sucks.
So,
Should you kill player characters in the last fight?
It
Absolutely.
shows the possibility.
I don't think there's any other time when it's more appropriate to kill a player character, especially in that final fight when everything is on the line. I think most player characters have that expectation that it's not going to feel real if some of our blood doesn't get shed.
yeah, like, if there's not at least the threat of
I killed
death.
somebody, right? Didn't I kill Frank?
Yeah. Now, see, here's the problem, too. Depending on the universe, you know, and for your example, sure, you killed our bard, but being a level 10 druid, I knew reincarnation, so I just fucking buried him and grew him a new body and was just shoved the soul in there and was like, there you go! And he's a half-elf now, and he was a fucking, like, furry or something.
He was a cat creature.
He was like a Khajiit from Elder Scrolls. Now he's a fucking half-elf, and he's just
We
like,
were hoping
why
for
am I in this world?
what was it, the strange thing?
The bugbear.
The bugbear! That was so cool.
I think there is a fine line, though, of having enough threat that the player characters realize we might not all make it out alive, versus
Only one of us make that.
because that one player whose character does die, they are definitely not going to have as much fun in the situation.
Yeah.
Unless it was KD here.
Yeah.
I
I would love
absolutely believe you would absolutely love it. But I've seen it happen a couple of times where that final fight has happened and somebody has gone down. That player didn't have as much fun as the other players. But I feel like it kind of enhances the fun of the other players of, oh my god, my character made it out of that.
Yeah, that person kind of becomes the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
And if they're, like, you know...
Salty.
I think it's a little, not justified, but, like, understandable. You know, like,
We
no
all
one else
died
died
in
but
campaign.
me. Shit. And especially if, like, there was reason to suspect... I've obviously talked a little bit about some of the games I've been in, but, like, there was a game where, like, you know, only one person died, and it was literally just the GM, like, rolling a dice and saying, I know you're at, like, 3/4 health, but you're dead now. And the player was like, what? How did they do that? Just, it's God, do what he wants. And, like, you're like, really? Right? That make any sense? Like, that I think there's...
It's gotta be a worthy death.
Sure. Like, I think you're rolling the dice fairly, you know, as the GM and as a player, and, like, you just got bad RNG, or, like, he rolled well. Like, it sucks,
Or
right?
crits.
But that's just how it works. Versus, like, literally the GM being like, shit, this combat went really well for them. Fuck. You're a little hurt. The guy pops up next to you and just stabs you through the chest. And there's like, do I get an evasion roll or anything? Can I roll defense? Nope, you're dead now. Like, roll to see if you bleed out, you know? And luckily this player, like, nat 20'd on, like, the bleed out roll and was able to, like, fucking hold his guts in until he got healed. But, what, you know? So, I guess, to wind that back around, yeah, you're gonna have maybe that one person be a sacrificial lamb to, like, do that, but I think you're right. I think that they're gonna have other players are gonna have a much more enhanced experience being like, yeah, it sure sucks Jim died, but like, hey, I didn't die, and then they'll enjoy it more, and Jim will feel pretty bad, and...
But eventually he'll
I
come
don't know,
around,
I
though.
feel like, I guess the key is making the death meaningful. Like, it shouldn't be just, like, random things happen like you were talking about. It should be, like, either this player tried to do something really dumb, or they tried to sacrifice themselves. I don't know, I feel like there should always be, like, some sort of plot element when it comes to killing someone.
Well, in the climactic final fight, that is the dramatic time. That's when the dice should fall where they may, and if somebody dies, they're dead.
Like, their legacy is going to be cemented, you know, and you can definitely have a bit in the epilogue about how towns are named after this person, and, like, maybe someone in the party names their kid after him, you know, like, he's definitely remembered, he or she's definitely remembered, but, like, it's not going to be, I mean, yeah, you're not going to get your own epilogue, unfortunately, but, hey, I mean, that's how it falls. Yeah, no, I like that idea. I've unfortunately been in a situation where I have killed out of spite. My first ever game, I killed 2 people in the final fight purely because we had been at loggerheads the whole game, and I was just so done with them that I just straight up killed them in the final fight. And they were the only two that died, and that almost caused a breach in our friendship, because they were like, no one else died, and I was like, besides, well, I guess that's not true. 2 other people also died, but they were like fighting for the losing side, so to speak. So they were... Anyway, point being, don't do that. Do not use the final fight as a, like, revenge mechanism to be like, you guys have been fucking with me the whole game? You're dead now. You hear me? You're dead.
Coming from the person that used it as a revenge mechanism.
Sure. You killed... Yeah, did you hate Frank?
No, I was talking about you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I'm saying now. That was my first ever game, you know. Years ago, I would never do that now, but at the time, I was like... I had this rationalization of, people should die in the final fight. What a coincidence! It happens to be the 2 people who I'm really having disagreements with. That's just how the dice fell, you know? And it is how the dice fell, but, like, I definitely, you know, went out of my way to, like, target them specifically. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
But...
If a player dies from their own stupid ideas, that's their fault.
Sure,
no dramatic ending,
if it's a fair dice roll, like... Sucks,
so
but that's where it is, you know?
Nat ones are nat ones.
Something that I normally do, especially in, like, the final fight of, like, a big arc or even the campaign, I start rolling out in the open.
Yeah.
As the game master. I make sure the player characters can see, oh, I did just roll 2 20s in a row on these attacks, and look, I did roll maximum amount of damage I could have rolled on the damage.
Sorry, but it's a dice chance. That's fair. I respect that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to go about it, because, like, that way you can automatically dispel, like, any, you know, it's, like, people might be holding shit of, like, hey, did he really roll that? I don't think he did, you know, like, you're just, if you're playing in person, that is, and even if you're online, remove the GM layer and just start rolling in the chat, like,
yeah.
Just be fair about it, you know? Like, that way, and that's gonna make, if Jim does die, that's gonna make it go over a little bit easier. He's still gonna be, you know, a tad salty and sad, but, like, at least he's not gonna have any, like, ideas of maybe you had it out for him, or, like, you fudged a roll or something. Mm-hmm. You can be like, nope, I mean, you saw everything I rolled, like, it's right there. So.
Although, if you're a game master and you do... I probably shouldn't be admitting this on the podcast, but I do fudge a lot of rolls when I'm the game master. Even when I'm rolling out in the open, I'm still fudging rolls, because you don't know what the modifiers I'm adding.
That's true, actually. Like, well, now you just lost all your credibility, Clayton. I'm afraid we're going to have to just shut the podcast down.
I think every GM I know has admitted that.
No.
But a lot of times I'm fudging to make sure player characters survive. Most of my dice fudging comes from toning down the things that I'm throwing at you, because I've misjudged and this thing is going to fucking tear through you guys.
Sure, GMing is, like, not an exact science, you know? A lot of it's on the fly.
Yeah. So a lot of times, like, if we're playing D&D and I'm rolling out in the open and I roll, like the die is showing a 12, I'll look at a player and I'll say, How much is your AC again? If it's less, like, if it's around, like, 15 or so, I might just say, oh, it was a miss because his 2-hit isn't that high. But now I've established for all the players that I have to remember, now his 2-hit is a little bit lower than what it had been.
No, I think that's normal, though. I think, and it's you know, and that's the thing. This topic isn't about player death, but since we're on the topic, like, you don't want to follow your stratagem through too efficiently. Like, if you did misjudge and you're like, they're not ready for this, don't be like, well, guess they're getting fucked. Like, that's, you know, not the solution here. It's, you know, knowing, you gotta know when to hold them. You gotta know when to fold them. You gotta know when to walk away. You gotta know when to run.
Something that I've realized recently is that players will make their decisions as they so choose. It does not matter what or when or how. Mm-hmm. But if you're playing an entirely, like, you're playing a relatively, like, good scaled game and you're all good friends and you all work together, and then suddenly your companion wants to kill the boss. And you're like, we don't kill people. This is anime. And you're just like, wait a minute, why are we killing people? And then all of a sudden he's a demon.
That's an escalation.
that's kind of how it went, and you're just like, did I make the right choice? Is the end of the game just the party is completely separated and falling apart?
Yeah.
What do you do when your players decide to do the complete opposite of what you anticipated and you have no path written for them?
Improv. Cry. I often cry in my games. A lot.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. You go think.
Yep.
There.
Then you're in there looking in the mirror being like, come on, Clayton. My name's Clayton Ray, and I've ran games over 20 years. I can do this. And you kind of like slap yourself a little bit, splash some water on your face. Take a deep breath, and you come out and you're like, a revenant appears. It's John from 3 sessions ago. He actually hated all of you. What do? And they're all like, oh shit, John. And then they're invested, and you just kind of breathe a sigh of relief. And you're
He's
like,
still a demon, and he's flying off to kill everybody.
yeah, but now you don't worry about that because John's there. And
I guess.
He's like, remember that time that you charged me $2.50 for fries and it was only $1? And you're like, that's pretty minor, and he doesn't care. Kind of gone full Kyle Perkins. I keep doing that. I need to stop.
Well, I mean, we've never seen KD and KP in the same room at the same time.
Yeah, you're right.
So...
It could actually...
I feel like we have, but that just might be me.
it's the magic of editing. Like, it's KP is a creation of me and Clayton. I do the voices for both, and then Clayton goes in and edits it and kind of makes it sound distinct and different, like changes the pitches and the tempos. So, full disclosure, right here.
So,
now you'll know.
Does that mean me and Nina are just dating the same person?
Yeah. It's kind of weird.
Does that make
Sorry
us
to have
the
to find
same
out like
person?
this. Could be.
Am I 2 people? I'm confused.
Maybe... Well, you guys are from different universes. From the Berenstain universes.
It's fine.
Mandela effect. Okay. So, Hayley, you had
Yes.
mentioned that you recently ran a game that I was in.
Yeah, the game that shall not be named. Continue.
Sure. And you were initially frustrated going into the final encounter because none of us did what you wanted us to
I
do.
did
Nope.
what you wanted me to do.
Yeah.
Besides Nina.
Because
Nina.
I wanted to work with the Titans.
And so, now part of that was because of a certain figure that was supposed to be
Yeah.
our rallying point that instead became a point of hatred.
Yeah.
But beyond that, so like, you have a very recent example of people blazing their own paths during the
Yeah.
final fight.
So, I was running a Scion game in World of Darkness, where I wanted them to make a decision at a crossroads between siding with the gods, who in my game I was making pretty much evil, like they are the bad guys, your parents, they suck, or the Titans, who were the kids of the Titans, who were fighting to eliminate the gods and eliminate the Titans and create something new and equal. And I wanted them to go with the Titans. So, me, being the bad DM that I am, did not put in enough small hints as to the Titans, because I was hinting with the gods heavily, but I completely forgot about the Titans, and I didn't bring in their rallying point until it was the first time they met him. I should have interspersed him in between. I was like, you see... Yeah, like, when they escaped from the prison, I should have had him be, like, a helping member, or the people who escaped are like, yeah, we're going to this player. So, because I know... So it would have been a much more... He would have been more solidified in the world. Instead, I made Kylo Ren. It's not what I wanted. He wasn't supposed to be Kylo Ren at all, but yeah.
I supported Kylo Ren.
That's what they made him out to be. And it was really sad. So they decided to not side with the gods or the Titans. They were going to go to the gods and try and kill them themselves. And fuck Kai. The path they chose was fuck Kai, which is very sad because I loved him. And
Yeah, but the players did.
the players did not.
And
so
that
I took,
is, at the end of the day.
so I took 3 weeks apart, and I decided, fuck it. This is the game that they want. This is the game I will try to run. So we spent 3 sessions doing, not espionage, but like talking to the gods, trying to come up with alliances to get them to not do some fucked up shit. And the final battle I did, I made Kai and his army appear. And I went full in for how they perceived him to be. I even gave him a flaming light sword and just let them murder him. And it was real sad. You gave them a warning as your character. He's like, yeah, hey, don't care if you live or not, but like, if you want to live, I guess, here's a portal you can go through.
No one took it.
No one took it.
I see.
Yeah, they said
Literally everyone else just started killing people.
that. Yeah.
Did I die?
Okay,
You
that's
did
not
not.
true. the only people, this is a slight tangent, but like, I was the only person killing anyone besides
That's because you had the god killer.
True.
And really wanted to kill Kai, and Rainbow wanted to escape with her girlfriend off the waterfall, and Hannah just wanted to hang out with Jormungandr.
Well, okay, but how did you handle this situation?
Not very well.
Okay,
but...
well, you're right, Hayley. Thank you. You know what? You're right, Clayton. Let's. That is all we needed. So let's just switch.
Well, what I'm saying is, what I've learned from that experience is players cannot make wrong choices. Players can only make choices. And while that's not the choice I would have made or the ones I want to run, I would suggest do what you can to make the best story.
Are you telling me that this game warped your sense of right and wrong?
Yeah.
Incredible.
It sure did.
And then you're like, the world's gray. There's only...
Sorry, guys. Yeah, this game really fucked me up as a DM and as a player, and it was not the best experience for me, but I'm glad I was able to finish a story to completion, and from my understanding, the players had fun, and at the end of the day, that's all I could hope for.
That's a good way to go about it, you know? I think that, like, that is a big problem with planning final boss fights, is never really knowing what the players are going to do, because it's a tabletop game.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much going on, there's... infinite routes, theoretically, that you can approach problems.
Yeah. I, the game master, am not as smart as all of you, the players.
Mm-hmm. That's our age-old wisdom.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, before the podcast, I was talking about a scenario in which maybe your characters in, like, Session 2 had, like, helped some soldier down on his luck. And he was like, I'll never forget this, and you write it down in your notes, like, blah, 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 owes me a favor. And you, the GM, completely forget about it, but that player's, like, sitting on it and sitting on it and sitting on it. And then Final Fight comes around, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna, before we head into, like, face the Archfiend, I'm gonna tell, Joe. I don't know why our character names in this fantasy game are all, like, Joe, John, and Bob.
Jelly.
I'm gonna tell John to Joe to come on over and help us out, and best case he shows up with like one dude, or worst case shows up with an army, and you're like, well, I guess that changes the scenario, a little bit, and then you have to just go from there. Maybe like you turn into a more climactic, like, this thing's up in the sky and everyone's taking pot shots at it and it's huge and like the party's running around on top of it or something, or you just maybe, if depending on the tone, you play it straight. You're like, yeah, the Archfiend only expected, like, the chosen adventurers, not an army. You just kind of stomp them, and, I think that would not be anticlimactic again, depending on the tone. Mm-hmm. Like, if the party is, like, feeling accomplished, that they remember, because they're going to feel smart. They're going to be like, we outplayed you, and you're going to be like, you did, and, you can give it to them, and maybe that'll give them a sense of victory that they might have gotten through also just fighting the boss. So,
yeah, if you present the players with some sort of dilemma, it can be a dilemma that you feel is very clear cut, but both sides have some sort of negative to them. The players will take every moment that you allow them to sit there and think of a way around it, and that might be they suddenly remember this NPC who occurred in session 2 of a 30-session campaign, that they suddenly remembered that they have this ability to call on this person for aid. Mm-hmm. Or it might be just going back to they're a lot smarter than you. They are very aware of all of the things on their character sheet a lot better than the player character, or than the game master. And they will be able to, in that clutch situation, like, the wizard will be able to look at their spell list and see, oh, I can use this spell to do this thing, and then the cleric can do this other spell, and this combination, something that was never intended in the rules, can totally circumvent both dilemmas.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, we've been talking a little bit about being flexible, mm-hmm. and, like, that's just where that flexibility needs to come in, because no one's gonna have fun if you rigidly try to stick to something that's now obsolete. If the scenario you had planned is, like, not gonna work given player choice, like, trying to do it anyway is going to be unfun for you because the scenarios change, and unfun for the players because they're going to feel like you're not responding to what... Like, if you just say, oh, he sees the army and just obliterates it, they're going to be like, really? Like, why doesn't he just do that to us too, and stuff like that. I think it's interesting, because I think that planning and executing a final fight is actually just a microcosm for, like, running a game overall.
Yeah, exactly like microcosm of designing the entire campaign. You've got to make sure that all of the pieces that you need are set up and available to the player characters in the immediate lead up to that final confrontation. And you also need to have the entire series of adventures that you've gone on culminate logically in what they're going into. Mm-hmm. Kind of on the idea of like making the bad guy more than just a pile of hit points. That's something that if you have enough time ahead of time to sow seeds of how this final fight isn't going to be exactly like you planned it. There's something that you're going to have to do in order to, like, some weird puzzle or trick that you have to do to take down the big bad guy. You've got to both give foreshadowing and hints that it's going to come up ahead of time for the player characters to prepare. And you've also got to remind them you've got to put markers in of how they're going to do that when that situation arises.
Yeah, I don't know how to be subtle enough.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it either. And it's something that I struggle with because I will put things that I think are going to be subtle, and they are way too subtle. Nobody picks up on it. I will throw things at that I feel like are just way too obvious. And again, nobody will pick up. Or I can do something that I think is like it's in the medium there where it's obvious enough that they'll see it, but they'll also have to work with it. But then one of the player characters will just, in 2 seconds, figure out the entire plot of the campaign.
It's hard, but I think it's better to try it rather than not.
Yeah. And if it's not subtle enough, you can always make it more obvious. Or if it's too subtle, you can always make it more obvious. Mm-hmm. And if it's not subtle enough, you can just say, aha, there's more that you don't know, and then make it up later.
Something I want to touch on really quick is using the final fight to tie up, like, loose ends and, like, quote-unquote fan service.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the times in a game, you're reaching that point where you need to kind of tie everything in and tie everything up. And I know I've definitely been in situations where I've never tried to force anything, but I've definitely been like, well, I thought I was going somewhere with, like, this plot line and didn't really go anywhere. Maybe, you can co-opt that into the final fight somehow. Or you can just kind of let it trail off and be like, hopefully they won't remember, whatever. Mm-hmm. I would say you have to be careful with the fan service, though.
You don't want to make it too much, but you want it to be just enough, like, nods to character stories. If someone really has, like, an enemy that they've been wanting to vanquish, either have some sort of, like, moment to it or make them a part of the final fight. I'm really into fan service in the sense of I want my players to have the best experience that they can. So if that means they really wanted to use a weapon or they have a power that they haven't gotten to use all campaign, I would try and make a situation happen where they get to do that so they feel character fulfillment or they feel plot fulfillment. A lot of my grievances from games I'm disappointed in come from the fact that there were so many things that were left open-ended, or, like, rocks fall, everybody dies, this isn't a satisfying end. So you don't want to make it the entire goal of your final boss battle. The battle at the end of the day should be the plot, that all of these things are coming together to make this one big bad. And, if that's not how your story's working, then I would, suggest taking a step back and looking at it. But, fan service should not be the main course. It should be an appetizer or maybe dessert afterwards.
So what exactly do you mean by the fan service?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Okay, so fan service, I guess, is something that a player wants and has made very clear that they want. the fan service aspect comes in, while this wasn't the main goal, I do not see any issue with granting you something that would make you happy and we can continue on with our plot. I guess, like, for example, fan service. So in the game that shall not be mentioned, I had a player who
we sure are mentioning it a lot.
Yeah, I know we are.
Ooh.
I had a player who loved Jormungandr, the world snake, and they rolled essentially what would be a nat 20 because it was World of Darkness with 10s. They rolled like 11 successes to try and talk to Jormungandr and befriended it. And I guess in the end battle, I let them like talk to them, and the world snake helped out a little bit in the beginning. And they're like, "Listen, you want to get out of here? We can do that." So I giving them that route and that option, so they can, you talked to Jormungandr one last time. You guys are chill. Now you can be satisfied with that and focus on the things that you need to focus on.
But when is fan service too far?
Well, that's what I was going to get at, is that, like, you don't want to cram too much in there.
Yeah.
And you also don't want to use it as a, like, self-fulfillment fantasy. Like, I really liked these NPCs. They're going to show up and help, and everyone might be like, oh, they were, like, kind of cool, but, like, now they're here, you know? Like, you don't want to do anything like that.
Yeah.
Or steal the show or anything, because, like, ultimately it is, you know, it is the player's moment here. They're confronting their biggest antagonist, whether it's again, like, fantasy-style archdemon, or it's, like, their landlord.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that, like, fan service should never be the main focus, and fan service should never be for you. It should always be for your players.
Sure.
I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I think you need to know what they want.
Yeah.
And, like, you assuming that they want this, or you being like, oh, well, I'll just bring back everybody that's been important, like, that might not be what they want. They might not want anyone else there. They might be like, this is our moment. We don't want it, like, spoiled.
Something a GM of mine does is usually we have the main plot, and if we have unfulfilled business or unfinished business that is, like, similar to filler episodes, is we have a baby arc of where we can fulfill our business, and we have, like, a specific thing that is spotlighted towards us. And that helps one character development for your specific character, and then everybody else's if they so want. Nobody has to do this. There's a lot of players that usually take this up, and it, like, extends the campaign not too far past its, like, enjoyment point, and everybody gets a little bit of extra enjoyment out of their specific character and their fan service, and I found that that's very helpful.
Nice.
I think it's important to do one of two things. Either do the video game logic and wrap up everything before the final fight. For example, Mass Effect 2, I played that game a lot, and you have to, like, kind of wrap up everyone's, like, loyalty missions and, like, side quests and stuff, because once you go through that warp gate, or Mass Effect gate, I guess, to the final fight, that, like, the game will end there. And I think that you need to have that idea for the final fight, too, and have the game end there, or do sort of like what Nina was saying. I don't think having a mini arc of a session or two at most for each character, if they want one, after the events of the main game have gone on, like, if there is, and that's, I guess, how you can tie up some loose ends, is like, I never found my brother. Now's your chance to do that, or something along those lines.
Smart.
That maybe you couldn't tie into the main game, but you're still like, hey, this is still an important part of your character, and, like, their journey's not done until this is over. And then you can go do that, but you can also make it, you can change the tone, right? Because it would be weird if, like, you have a pending apocalypse, right? And this is why video game logic sometimes doesn't work, is it's just like, well, I still haven't found 50 radishes. Like, I think I might go do that now, and, like, the sky's super dark and there's lightning and, like, a volcano's erupting and you're like, oh, yeah, there's 1, 2, like, so sometimes it makes a little bit more sense to even have it after the big fight, like.
I think it's really wise, because that way it gives players an opportunity to, like, visit the world again, or if they want to continue it as a beginning of a new campaign. That's smart.
And what it does is it does not undermine your big fight. Like, that's still the end of the game. Like, I've always viewed it, and I was a video game person before I was a tabletop person, so that has definitely sort of shaped my views on tabletop games, but, like, I've always seen it as, like, non-shitty EA DLC for your campaign. You know, like no microtransactions here, folks. But like, for example, Mass Effect is another example. In like The Witcher, you know, there's like little expansions and stuff that take place after the main storyline that aren't as important, but are still like important for characterization or like tie up loose ends, and that's important.
And you don't have to do it.
Sure, and if there's a player that's like, hey, like I really enjoy playing the campaign, but like I don't have time, or like maybe if they're being honest, like I don't have the interest of doing this, like that's fine. As long as it's not just you running this like a solo session, as long as there's like at least one other person that wants to go with them, you do it. So.
Well, I just want to put out there that as a game master, I am totally open to you guys wanting to do additional content through microtransactions. So.
Rate $2.99 an hour.
Yeah, at any point you can throw me some extra money and I can produce extra content for you.
Delightful. But yeah, that to me is always, I think, made a little bit more sense than trying to like cram everything in, because I think you will run into a problem of, does this realistically fit, or am I forcing this in to like reconnect to this plot point that maybe is going nowhere, you know? And instead of being like, and you can even do this for non-character specific stuff. Like if you have a plot line that maybe the player is super interested in, but you're like, for whatever reason, I don't like know what to do with it now, or I ran out of time to do stuff with it. Have that just be either the start of a next game or a stuff after the main campaign has ended. You know, I had a game where a player got a demon sword and like he was being like always like he was like kill people, and he was always like no. And he was like, kill people, and I'd like, make a will save. And he'd always pass it, and I'd be like, oh, I'll get you one day, you know? But that demon sword was not, like, was something I had an idea for, but didn't have time to do in the plot. So then when I ran a sequel game to that, all of a sudden, the focus was on the demon sword, because everyone's like, it's so weird that our, like, warrior has that sword that makes him, like, try to kill people. And I was like, yeah, that is pretty weird, isn't it? And everyone's like, what about, can we, like, find out more about that? And I was like, yeah, maybe, you know, we only got, like, 2 sessions left for both. I was running it summers in between college. So I was like, yeah, we're all going off back to school. Like, we won't have time to do that. But then when I ran the sequel game, I was like, everybody really want to know about that sword. I'll just make that the focus. So I don't think not wrapping stuff up is a boon, or a bane, sorry. Like, I think it can be a boon. Especially if you're planning on coming back, like, if it's not the final session of the whole campaign, yeah,
that's great. Mm-hmm. But even if it is the final session of the campaign, if you have any inkling that you're going to be running any sequel campaigns, not everything has to be wrapped up.
Yeah.
And what immediately jumps to mind is our Urbana game, where I had truncated a lot of content for what ended up being the end of the campaign just because I was getting burnt out. But I left a lot of stuff open for if I ever do want to pick that up. In the final fight, you guys definitely defeated the evil lich who had summoned the demon army into the world. But we kind of ended after that, and we didn't really deal with the fact that there is a demon army still there in the world. The main threat that was bringing more through was ended, but I had an entire basically wrap up arc of you guys basically taking care of that immediate threat after the threat of the big bad who had brought the army in the first place was stopped. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to do, well, what I ended up kind of doing, but I didn't want to do, was the whole, Independence Day, Avengers thing where the enemy army has this one weak spot, so if we just attack this weak spot, take it out, and then suddenly the entire rest of the army is completely null and void.
Yeah.
Urbana is the first example I think of when I think of a perfect ending to a campaign.
Well, I'm glad you thought that was a perfect ending, because I did not.
Oh, see, I thought it was... Okay, go. Tell me why you hated it.
I'm not going to do that, because that's for a different type of podcast, or a different topic. But I do want to ask... I want to make a point about this big campaign that we had that we all really enjoyed, that Hayley, you said was perfect.
It was, though. It was my perfect game.
I want to issue a challenge to each one of you. Tell me about the fights you were in. Which fights do you remember? I will let whoever wants to go first go first.
I'll go first. I remember the first fight of the game ever in the like tombs where we fought those zombies. And I remember that only like half of us were there for whatever reason. I remember some of the like bigger fights we had, like before we went into the Tomb of Horrors, there was that big fight against the Vikinger. I remember the like combat against the elves. I remember that fight against the Shades where no one knew how to like stop them, and we spent like 6 turns just slashing through them, and everyone was like, we can't do anything, and George's like, I'll magic him, and that didn't work. And then like I just was like, wait a minute, Clayton, I just smashed the weapon, and you're like, he dies, and I was like, yes, got him. Yeah, I remember, I think in general, a like lot of the larger scale stuff, you know, but even within that though, like, you know, I remember fighting my character's parents in the Vikinger arc, and then I remember like in the final fight fighting the Lich. So that's what I got.
Okay. What specifically about the final fight do you remember? Because that's actually my point. Is
interesting.
That the final fight wasn't memorable. I don't think it wasn't cinematic.
It wasn't.
It was. I felt like it was really bland.
In the spirit of full disclosure, I kind of agree with you, and that's not like shooting you down. Like, the only reason I really truly like that fight in particular sticks with me, and that's not to say you do combat bad, because like I just listed a bunch of other shit that I remember pretty memorably. But that fight was kind of just, he was there. He died pretty quick. I remember too. Like, I think me and Jordan just kind of ripped him up, and you know that didn't help.
Yeah, the biggest obstacle there was just getting to him.
Yeah, and then we got there, and then I think it lasted like what 3 turns, maybe a little bit longer,
something like that.
Because like I just went full berserker and like started cutting him, and Jordan just did bullshit magic, and like everybody else was kind of there being like, I'm helping,
I'm healing.
Yeah.
See, for me, the reason why I said it was one of my perfect endings is because what I remember most about that battle is the build-up to it, and I consider that a part of the battle because we were still fighting smaller armies that we encountered on our way getting there, and I was off on diplomatic missions trying to convince everybody to join, and we made an entire world army to take on this one guy. Like, how cool is that? How cinematic is that we united the entire fucking world! Fucking,
Sure.
we did it all. And then what I remember from that battle is I was not a fighter. I'm a lover, not a fighter.
You're not
but
a
I
fighter?
had Anna, who is Beth's character, me and my wyvern, Trigorin. We were flying, and I was doing nothing but trying to make sure we don't fall out of the sky, and Anna was shooting like a fucking mad woman, and it was so cool, because I felt like I was actually doing something. I'm not a fighter character, so I was actually in a battle, and that was so cool and awesome, and I could help out, but I didn't have to, like, die, and I got to do diplomacy, and the way that everything fell apart, but there was still so much left unfinished, like, it was just so great. And while, yeah, he might have gone down in 3 or 4 hits, the experience that I had with the entire way that it went through from getting to use every aspect of my character was one of my favorite things.
Well,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, I'll say, I guess I hadn't considered that since I was, like, one of our 2 or 3 primary combat characters, that, like, all I really did was combat. So, eventually, no matter what you would have done, combat's gonna start to blur together for me, because, like, I kill things, that's what I do as that character. To your points, so, well, that first one was, so I can see how, since you had a more active role in combat, that sticks out more memorably to you, versus me, where I was just like, alright, another zombie. This one's pretty tough, though, but it's still a zombie, and I'm like, hacking at him. 2, I think, but you liked the preparation for the fight more so than the final fight. Like, because a lot of what you had mentioned, so that's a plus for you, Clayton, because that means, the way you handled the build-up was really, important and well done. But you brought up the point of the World Army, and, like, I don't, maybe I'm misremembering, but, like, I didn't feel as though we really saw the impact of that in the fight.
Well, that was more just where I was forced to truncate the end. I was combining what I had initially planned on being another 15 sessions into basically 2 sessions.
Sure. Okay. Yikes! That is quite the tunnel there.
Yeah, I bring that up because to me that was not the most memorable cinematic fight of that campaign. The most memorable cinematic fight of that campaign was where you guys were all on the hippogriffs and stuff fighting the dragons and
That
the
was really awesome.
That was really
Oh, that's right. And
so
Jordan,
good.
like, suicide dived one.
turducken.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think the problem with that is you had so many cinematic moments throughout the campaign that it was really hard to top it off. Because with, the Tomb of Horrors and all of the different puzzles and all of the different adventures that we had, to end it all in one fight and to call that our most cinematic experience is very difficult.
Yeah. The entire arc with Magnus's parents and the genocide that the Vikinger were trying to do, that was maybe some of my favorite arcs we've ever done in any game. And the way that you were able to continue momentum with every single session, even though we're essentially just doing one battle for 7 sessions, was just incredible. And I remember a lot of details from that, even though they weren't about my character.
I also think that the fact that we had a player death mid-game that was very cinematic really upped the ante, because that felt like an end of an era in the game.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was a big arc ending final battle.
Yeah.
That had happened, and
That definitely felt like the end of the mid-game.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very good illustration of kind of the points that we're making, because you knew going into the battle that it's not just we have to get in there and kill this person. We got to get the hell out of there. That was what took up the most prep for you guys, is just figuring out how in the hell we're going to get out of there. You spent more time thinking about how you were going to get out once the deed was done than you did on how to get there. You figured out how you were going to get there pretty quick.
It's kind of what we were talking about earlier of aggro after the battle, and where it was either it was either a TPK or a single murder.
And that broke the party.
Sure. I mean, that definitely, I think, changed the dynamics in the party and even the world and the game itself going forward. And so in a lot of ways, I think that you nailed with that fight what it means to have a climactic. Because this is ultimately, I guess we started off by saying, of the last fight, right? But what we've been talking about more is climatic boss encounters. And that definitely fit the bill.
Yeah. It was by far, I think, one of my favorite. It could have been a campaign and one of my favorite battles, because it felt real. Real in campaign sense, but it was impactful for people and the party.
Yeah, if you had ended the game there, I think that would have been a fine ending point. I think people probably been well, what happens next? Sure, but I think that would have certainly been a somber, but it would have been a fair victory. We won, but at what cost, sort of deal. And something that I also thought of too. This game ran for almost over a year, right?
Just shy of a year.
That's a long time to be running a game. A lot of games, I think, don't last that long, playing consistently week to week.
Consistent.
Right? We played pretty consistently, though, I think.
It was every week, pretty much.
There was, I think, a month? Or...
Yeah, it was December we didn't play, but...
Sure, but for the most part of a year-long game, we played pretty consistently, and so... And maybe you can test this. You definitely were getting burned out, but eventually you just start running out of stuff in the tank. I think by the time that final boss fight rolled around, you had so many other great and cinematic, climatic fights throughout the game that by that point, maybe you know better than me, but I think maybe to that point you were kind of being well, here we are. This has been going on for a year. So I think that. Just in general, not just in your case, but I think in general that's a good thing to keep in mind too, is the longer a game goes on, the harder it's going to be for you to have this giant cinematic, final ending note. Because you've probably been doing a lot of those throughout the course of the game so far.
Your creative tank starts to run.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably part of it too, is... To general advice, I would say
save the best for last. If you
sorta,
really want
sure, yeah. If you're really determined to have this great ending note of finality, right? Then I guess you kind of almost have to start planning that from the start, and then tinkering with and adjusting it as the game progresses, right? Plan your whole big thing, all your plot points that you want connect to that, everything else, and then sort of tinker with it and edit it as things change throughout the course of the game. And then you have that just ready to go already. And I don't know if you did have an idea. I mean, maybe you can answer that, but...
Yeah, I actually had a lot of the campaign plotted out, a lot of beats that... I had something for each one of the items that you were gathering. I had something for all of the things that a Sararak was doing that needed to be in place. I could easily have run the campaign. Like, I had enough information planned out that I could have run the campaign twice as long as
Yeah,
I did.
and that's part of it, too, was you already made it yourself. I think you were forcing an end there because you were running out of steam. So, maybe that was it as well. But I would not, to be clear, I'm not, like, you did good. You did, that was a great game. We don't remember, I was just telling you off the microphone about, like, someone that's not part of our group anymore, but that I still am friends with and see semi-regularly. We were just talking about it. Like, everyone remembers it fondly and remembers the fights, and we all talked about the fights.
Yeah.
So.
And especially with the way that it ended, we could easily pick it back up with you being not Magnus, Ingwe being like a main antagonist.
I prefer to see him as a protagonist.
Fuck you!
The
He's
fact
Stalin.
that even, like, post-characterization, even though you are the one that died in the end and you created your new character, you were shit-talking your own character, and that, like, I don't know. I don't understand.
Yeah, a big part of that second character, this is a slight tangent, but a big part of that second character was me just being like, how can I really separate him from my old character? Be like, I'll just shit-talk my old character constantly. And everyone else, the wounds were still fresh. They healed for me, like, pretty damn quick. I, like, posted that, like, nerdy, mushy thing on Facebook, and then I was like, I'm ready for the next character.
I'm ready to just make you suffer.
But everyone else is still like, I miss Magnus. And they're like, Magnus was weak. Like, he didn't know what he was doing. Like,
Don't
we need a
speak
strong
about
hand.
our father like that.
So, yeah, that's a topic for another game,
yeah.
or another podcast, though, would be, like...
Reviving yourself.
Sure, how do you deal with character death and, like, playing somewhat different from a player standpoint?
Yeah, that could be fun.
So I'm sure we've all had characters die here. I don't know why I looked at you in particular.
Because you're the first person that ever killed my character in my very first game. Ever!
Dice fall where they may. No one can say I'm not impartial.
You weren't dating them. Did we talk about locations yet?
Location.
Not really.
Man, what's the coolest place you can imagine a boss fight being?
In the boss.
Inside the boss.
You said creative.
Disagree. I
Like-
said coolest.
Oh.
I said coolest. I think my coolest one so far has been on a floating ghost pirate ship, but that's just
That's
me.
pretty cool.
Are you saying that we've ever fought in?
Yeah.
Or that we've run ourselves? Or does it not matter? Just in general.
Fought in, that's at least the one I can remember right now. I think something cool as well was, when the earth was burning and a giant phoenix came out, but...
That's cool. I fought in Chicago, but it was risen 60 feet in the air, the entire city trapped in a bubble of darkness, and we had to pop the bubble as our big boss, whoever, to
Sounds
make it
very
go down.
marvelous.
But then we had to make sure we all don't fall down to our death. We had to slowly figure a way to get Chicago back in the earth, and then make sure everybody forgot that Chicago was floating for like 2 days.
Well, minus the last part, that kind of sounds like Age of Ultron.
I guess it kind of does.
Yeah.
This was before Age of Voltron came out. It was my second vampire game I played in.
Cool.
The Chicago arc.
I don't have one,
No?
actually.
You've never had a great stage that you
Well, I'm not saying that's that I haven't like been in cool like
combats?
combats in cool places, but like to me personally, the location has never been as important of a part of the fight for me,
It's
and
like
it
a
should
Smash
be.
Bros. Stage.
Sure, and I'm saying that's a deficiency in the way I run games, I guess.
Yeah, I guess now that you think of it, you're not very big on location.
Not super. I'm actually not the best at setting the scene, which is like an issue. Maybe not an issue, but like I could be better at it.
I mean, nobody's noticed up until now.
Sure, but like I've never been like, yeah, I'm gonna have this huge thing in a volcano or something. I'd be like,
I'm all about scenery.
scenery. So yeah, like so anytime I've been in a fight somewhere, I've been like, well, this is a cool location, I guess, but I'm not like, whoa, like I can't believe I'm fighting this person here. Like that's just me as a person.
That's fair.
Whenever I'm designing a big climactic cinematic fight, I try to think of what cool thing is going on that poses a danger in and of itself. My favorite combat that I have ever run is the Abena combat, where you guys were on the hippogriffs and you were fighting the dragons and the Viking are on the wyverns. Because I just love aerial combat. I like movies with fighter jets. I like Star Wars. It's a venue that I really love to explore combat in. I love those types of video games. As far as games that I have played, I'm terrible for remembering games that I played. Just because it was a big combat. Well, it was a game that pretty much inspired was one of the inspirations for me wanting to do the Abena game. Was a game where the player characters decided to create a mercenary guild, and so we had basically a fairly sizable army on our side, although it was not anywhere near the size of what we played in Abena. But we had additional people on our side, and it was a very dire situation. We had a lot of big magics, like manipulating the terrain of the battlefield during the course of the battle. So, like, walls were coming up, mountains were tumbling down, great sinkholes were opening up, swallowing units and stuff like that. So any type of combat that is just really dynamic, that the terrain itself changes, is what I love.
That is pretty cool, actually.
I guess this isn't so much a location, though location plays an important part of what I like about this sort of combat, but like fights where it feels like a battle or like a war have always really got me going. So like some of the fights in Abena where like it felt like people were doing different things. The final fight of the Factions game actually felt pretty climactic to me, and the location was kind of cool. Not so much of like where we were, so much as where everyone was. Like it felt like there was a bunch of different shit happening in different places to the point of where you could visualize this being a large-scale thing.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
The thing that I most loved about that final fight in the Factions game was, unlike any other campaign I've been in, we were there fighting for our homes.
Yeah.
We were on home streets that we had spent the entire campaign living in, that we had designed ourselves. We were fighting for everything that our characters had acquired up until that point, and you don't get that in very many games.
Yeah, it had like a Stalingrad feel to it, which I had never gotten in a tabletop before, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, just for me, like, you know, the old like volcano thing, like I'm not saying it's not cool, it's just like it's hard for me to visualize, and usually I'm more focused on like the storyline or like what are the tensions going into this fight more so than like where are we fighting.
I think sometimes I focus too much on the little details that go forgotten and forget to focus on the logistics part of the fights, at least from what I can tell. And I don't know. There's got to be a balance between, like, dramatic scenery and good dialogue.
Yeah. I guess to, like, focus more on the general topic, like, obviously pick somewhere cool, but don't make it super impractical unless there's a reason it's that way. I'll keep using the volcano thing. Like,
why are you in a volcano?
Sure, don't set your fantasy final fight in a volcano unless, like, there's a reason that the big bad would be there, or, like, your players have ways of navigating that heat and, like, the lava, because it's just going to come off, I would say, as a little odd if, like, they're in there and, you know, they're not burning up and no one really addresses, like, why that's happening. And you can obviously hand wave that, sure, but at least you have to hand wave it. You can't just not address that, you know, because what if the players are like, well, why can't we use the lava against him? So.
And you're just like, because it's cold lava.
Yeah, like you have to be willing to be impartial toward the location. So that's all I got, I think, for location.
Well, do we want to talk about geek things that are interesting to us?
Yeah.
My first one is about the new Dune movie, or movies, that are supposed to be coming out next year. And that there is going to be along with the release of the first movie, there's going to be a role-playing game, like officially licensed role-playing game released along with it.
Nice.
And
that's actually really rad.
The other thing is something that I learned that is being used on farms out in Oregon. Farmers are starting to actually use laser turrets to prevent birds from eating the crops.
Wow.
That's cool!
They'll set up an automated turret that will sense whenever a bird is flying by, and it'll shoot a green laser at it. And it doesn't actually harm the bird, but it's a deterrence by annoyance. They fly away. They don't come.
So it's like modern scarecrows.
Yeah, it is much, much more cost effective than having a radio play, like music or whatever. Not only is it cost effective, it is way more effective because it's an active deterrence. Farmers don't need to have falconers come out and have predatory birds flying around to deter the birds, and it's way more effective than any other method of preventing loss of crops due to birds.
Nice. I have I have two things. One, Nina and I just went to MatsuriCon, and I just posted some really amazing pictures of my Suicide Squad Harley Quinn cosplay. If you're interested in checking those out, you can find me on Instagram as Bae the Fae, and that's BAETHEFAE. Ta-da! It's really special to me because my photographer, Heather Willard, I believe. Heather Willard is her...
Yeah.
Del Willard? Heather Willard did my photos, and it's the last time I'll be doing Harley for a while, since I've been doing the outfit for around 4 years, just before Suicide Squad came out. And she has a lot of wear and tear that I don't have the money to financially put her back together. So it was really sentimental to me, and if you get a chance to look at it, I hope you like it. 2, God of War, Boy of Dad. I've been playing a lot of that lately, and I'm very interested in the mythology that they pulled from, and specifically what they changed about it. Looking at it from a plot-wise point, it's just masterful writing. Like, almost Shyamalan-esque in the ways that they have roundabout twists. It's just some of the best video game writing I've ever seen, and I highly recommend it.
RWBY Volume 6 will be out on October 27th, and I'm ridiculously pumped. If you don't watch RWBY, it's a Rooster Teeth-based anime, and it is bomb, and I'm just so hoping that the character that I created through sweat, blood, and tears, through cosplay, 3 seasons ago, will finally come back, because she is still alive. But I'm gonna go to that premiere, all dressed up here in town. On top of that, I had been away. I was in Costa Rica for about 5 weeks, and I learned a lot of fun new things there, including a lot about dance.
A lot about what?
A lot about dance history, and I learned that Costa Rica is has the smallest carbon footprint in the world. They are very resourceful. They use only electric showers. They don't have hot water tanks. They don't use dryers. They throw away all toilet paper waste instead of flushing it, which I think is very strange. And there are many resource locations where people use all of their defecation and all of that again in their daily life, which is really outside of what we think about. And then they have ridiculously awful traffic, is what I've learned. And to reduce the amount of carbon, smog and all of that, there are only specific cars that are allowed to drive during the week. And I know somewhere in the States that happens as well, but I also found that really interesting. They all live, and people live, kids live with their parents up until they get married or decide to leave, and I feel like that culture is also very helpful and good. And gosh, their tuition, it's so much nicer there, and so is their healthcare. And I highly suggest looking into all of their information, but it's really cool. And I thought the carbon footprint stuff was really interesting, considering how bad America is.
So when I link this in the show notes, I will just link to a come visit Costa Rica.
Yeah, or the Costa Rica.gov page or something. Well, I don't actually do anything with my life, so all I can talk about is movies. But I recently watched the 2 Godzilla anime films on Netflix, and they are, if you go in with kind of just a, open mind, they're really good movies. You know, how do you do Godzilla anymore? That's a big question, right? Godzilla's been done so much. But the way that they approach these films is much more kind of Evangelion-esque, and it's a lot more about, like, moral conflicts and, like, philosophy more so than... And that's monster movies in general are always making a philosophical statement, sure. But this is more on the nose than... I would equate it more to Peter Jackson's King Kong than, like, the Kong movie that just came out, Skull Island, or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I also recently watched High Noon with Gary Cooper, the 1952
It's
Western.
High Noon!
No McCree was involved in this film, but it's a sort of very interesting, like, sort of drama mystery Western, and I really like the statements that the main character sort of goes through, portrayed by Gary Cooper, and it's just, it's a little bit of a different Western, and if you like older movies, I would check it out. So, it's High Noon, Gary Cooper.
All right, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Woo!
Wow. How dare you.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.